BBC Radio Sheffield. Don't forget that coming up between 9 and 10, it is a special Kat's Kitchen, teaching you how to cook for arthritis. It's a really lovely show. It first aired last spring, and I wanted to give you a second chance to hear it. That is Kat's Kitchen Arthritis Special, coming between 9 and 10 here on BBC Radio Sheffield. Now, if you have been on our Facebook or Twitter pages over the last couple of days, you might have seen some really striking black and white photographs. They were taken in Sheffield in the 1960s by Robert Blomfield, an amateur photographer who captured life on the streets of post-war Britain. Robert sadly died in December 2020, and now his son Will is working to raise awareness of his father's work. Thank you so much for talking to me this morning, Will. Well, let's just start with how aware you were of your father's photography, because he wasn't a professional photographer. He did this in his spare time, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. A total amateur in the sense that he was not being paid for any of this photography he was doing. He was a doctor by profession. So, yeah, he was doing this in his spare time, and it's a very time-consuming process. But as to how aware we were of it, we were aware that he had a camera around his neck all the time, literally all the time, and was just constantly snapping away at stuff. We didn't pay it too much attention. It was more of a pain to us because it distracted him from us. But it was just there as a sort of constant in the background. Like some people probably have parents who sing in the shower or whatever. We had a dad who just took loads and loads and loads of photographs at every opportunity. Always had a camera.
So when did you become aware that these weren't just sort of the kind of snaps that my nan takes, for example, where they always miss the head of whoever she's taking a photo of? We've got thousands of photos of people without a head on. When did you actually realise that they weren't just nice, they were exceptional, because they are absolutely incredible photos? Yeah,
well, I'm sort of slightly embarrassed to admit that I was relatively late to the party on that. My mum was, she's passed away as well. She predeceased him, but she was a huge advocate of his work. She studied history of art and saw parallels in his work, in the composition, the way he took and framed photographs with classic paintings. And she was always banging the drum about his photographs. But as I say, we my brothers and I were relatively ignorant of it. But my middle brother did study art he did an art foundation year and did photography, so he was a bit more clued up about the challenges of taking photographs like this, and he was a bit more appreciative of them. And I started to kind of cotton on probably about in the early 2000s, when my mum started to digitize some of the images, and she began the process of touting them around various institutions, but without much success. I suppose it was when they started to be digitized and you sort of looked at them a little bit more closely, because it was starting to become a bit of a project, if you like, a family project. That's when the penny dropped.
And just to sort of give people an understanding of how prolific he was, because I've seen video footage of you sort of sorting through negatives and photos in your dad's home, and it was every single drawer, it seemed to me, was rammed full of them. How many do you think he's taken?
Well, that's a good question. We honestly don't know how many photographs there are. We are still going through that. So we've got two kind of parallel projects. We've got our own kind of cottage industry of scanning colour slides, and we estimate there's probably 20 to 25,000 colour slides to scan, and there's probably about 3,000 or 4,000 black and white prints that he made. So he made these in his own makeshift darkroom in his student digs and then at home. He made probably around 3,000 or 4,000. Those are largely scanned by our uncle, who's been involved in the project as well. But that is just the tip of the iceberg, because what you alluded to with the negatives is that every roll of film has 36 exposures. He might only print, 2 or 3 or maybe half a dozen, but at most maybe half the film would be actually printed. And that means there's all these other images that have literally never been printed and never seen the light of day, even by him. So we are hoping, with our new relationship with the University of Edinburgh, to unearth some hidden gems, some things that have literally never seen the light of day.
Well, let's talk about actually that relationship, because basically you've been on a mission over the last few years to, as you said, to try and get his work recognised. And as well as he lived and worked in Sheffield and took lots of amazing photos here, but he also spent a lot of time in Edinburgh and took some incredible photos there. And you have managed to sort of get him recognised there, haven't you? And you've got this relationship with the university. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so when we were trying to sort of wrestle with this project and how do we get traction, we thought about trying to get an exhibition in London. He's got lots of shots of London. Sheffield was an obvious choice because he was brought up in Sheffield, but Edinburgh seemed to be when he really kind of hit his peak as a photographer in terms of just how prolific he was, but also the quality of the images, because Edinburgh is a very photogenic city. Anyone who's been there will testify to that. It's just, every turn there's something that catches your eye. Even if you're not a photographer, you appreciate the beauty of the city. So going around there in the 50s, late 50s and through the early 60s, he was spoiled for choice in terms of things to take photographs of. And he was also really in his prime as an artist then. So the material from Edinburgh was probably some of his finest work. And I'm pleased to say the University of Edinburgh have recognised that, partly because he's an alumni of Edinburgh University who studied medicine there, but also just because they appreciate the legacy. And we have agreed with them to deposit with them all of his Scottish work. So he did take photos in Glasgow and in the Highlands as well, but it's mostly around Edinburgh. And they are going to be, first of all, preserving the archive, because it's a huge responsibility just to sort of look after these prints. The sheer volume, but also the sensitive nature of the images. They're going to keep those in a very sort of pristine environment, and then gradually scan them and help us expose all these hidden images. It's going to be a very long process, but we're really pleased with the offer of help.
We need to be able to shout about the photographs that he took here, and I feel like I'm on a mission now, to be honest, Will, to make an exhibition of the photographs that he took here happen, because the photo that basically turned me on to your dad's work was this incredible image, which you'll be able to see on BBC Radio Sheffield's Facebook page, of this woman in the 60s with the absolute quintessential scarf around her head, basically crossing the road in front of the Arts Tower. It's so incredible. Just really captures that amazing, iconic building, but also that time in the fashion. I just love it.
Well, there's lots of things about that picture that work. I mean, photographers talk about the decisive moment, and he's captured that. This is what he was so good at, because he always had a camera around his neck, and he was so good at just taking a photo so instinctively. Most of us sort of spend ages, if we've got a camera, we're focusing it and worrying about ISOs and all this, and he was just ready to go like a kind of sniper. And this lady striding across the road, that is not a posed shot, but it still works absolutely perfectly. And the contrast of the two buildings, the old building and the new sort of striking concrete edifice of the Arts Tower, with this lady striding across the road, looking very dapper. It's just that fleeting moment that he just happened to be there. He didn't stand there waiting. He was just probably walking past, going somewhere else, and then saw this opportunity and snapped it. And that's what he was so good at, just capturing that moment.
What did your dad tell you about what motivated him? Because he wasn't a professional photographer, he was a doctor, and he obviously loved doing this so very much. What did he tell you about why he did it?
Well, we've talked about this endlessly, trying to figure out what motivated him. I mean, he when you're good at something, you enjoy it, and people get a kick out of looking at your pictures, and that's probably a motivator. But he was quite private, and I think his work as a doctor inherently makes you interested in people, and what makes them tick. And I think the common thread through all of his work, whether it's professionally as a doctor or as an artist taking photos of people, I think the common thread is the people and his interest in people. He just seemed to have a fascination with people, and just exploring that in different ways, whether it was through his consulting room or through the lens.
He passed away in December 2020. Your work, though, to get his photos the recognition they deserve had begun before that. Did he get to enjoy any of the kind of response from people? Did he get to see any of that?
He did. He did. We had this exhibition that was kind of like the breakout moment. Was this exhibition in Edinburgh, which is at a place called the City Arts Centre. It's a very grand building, very near the train station in the centre of Edinburgh. So it was quite a prestigious location. It was a big deal for us to secure this location, and he was quite frail by this point. He'd had a stroke 20 years earlier, and so getting him anywhere was a bit of a mission because he had a wheelchair and so on and so forth. So, but we were determined that he would bask in his glory. So we got him up there, and he was reluctant to go. He wanted to just stay put in Hebden Bridge where he was living. But I drove him up the M6 and got him there, and he was absolutely. You could tell. I mean, because he was just a bit overwhelmed by it, but you could tell he was enjoying himself with all these people coming up and congratulating him on, the magnificent work he's produced, and that's continued ever since. Well, until his death, he was still getting those compliments and appreciating them. And I would just point out there's a lovely documentary, if any of your listeners are keen to find out more. There's a documentary that was made about him just before he passed away by a filmmaker called Stu Edwards. And that really does kind of capture the essence of our dad. His kind of sense of humour and his motivations are explored a bit in that film. That's on our website as well if anyone wants to have a look.
It's been really good to talk to you, Will. Thank you so much for telling us all about your dad and his incredible work. And I'm really hopeful. Let's get an exhibition happening in Sheffield.
Oh yeah, soon. Well, it was literally one of his kind of dying wishes. It sounds really corny, but it was to have an exhibition in Sheffield. So that's definitely something I'm motivated to do. So yeah.
Will, thanks so much for talking to me. Will Blomfield there. And he mentioned the website where that amazing documentary is. It's beautiful. I really advise watching it. And so many of his photos, you can find them there too. It's robertblomfield.co.uk.